My husband started coming home late from work every evening until I found out he was spending time with a female coworker. When I confronted him, he said I was being paranoid and needed to trust him more, claiming they were just talking about work. Hello Reddit, I never imagined I'd be the type of person to share something like this online, but here I am. I guess sometimes you just need to let it out, especially when the people closest to you don't really understand what's going on beneath the surface. Maybe writing it all down will help me make sense of it, or maybe it'll just be another reminder of how quickly things can change. My husband and I have been married for 7 years. We met in college. He was the charming, confident guy who could make anyone laugh, and I was the quiet, bookish type who never expected someone like him to even notice me. But he did. And when he did, it felt like I was the only person in the room. That's how he made me feel. Like I was special, like I mattered more than anything else in his world. Our friends called us the perfect couple, and honestly, I believed it. For a long time, I truly believed it. We built a life together. We got our first apartment, adopted a goofy Labrador named Max, and even went through the ups and downs of starting new careers. We had plans to travel, to buy a house, maybe even start a family. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. Or at least, I thought we were. Everything started to shift about 6 months ago. It was subtle at first, so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. My husband began coming home late from work every evening. At first, it was just an hour here or there. He'd send a quick text, running late, big project. Or, stuck in a meeting, be home soon. And I didn't question it. Why would I? He'd always been dedicated to his job, and late nights weren't unusual in his line of work. But then those late nights became more frequent. What started as once or twice a week turned into almost every night. He'd come through the door, exhausted and distracted, barely offering more than a peck on the cheek before disappearing into the shower or flopping onto the couch with his phone glued to his hand. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me the same vague responses: busy, lots of meetings, or nothing interesting. And then he'd change the subject, asking about my day like he was trying to steer the conversation away from himself. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. Everyone goes through busy seasons at work, right? But the distance between us grew in ways I couldn't ignore. We used to cook dinner together, laugh about our day, cuddle on the couch watching our favorite shows. But now he'd eat late, often saying he grabbed something at the office, and by the time he settled in at home, it felt like I was living with a stranger. The warmth that used to fill our apartment had been replaced with this cold, heavy silence that neither of us acknowledged. Then there were the weekends. Even when he wasn't working, he seemed distracted. He'd scroll through his phone constantly, replying to messages with this small, secretive smile I hadn't seen before. When I'd ask who he was texting, he'd casually say it was a coworker or something work-related. But there was something in his tone, something that made my stomach twist in ways I couldn't explain. The final straw was when he started forgetting to tell me when he'd be late. There were nights I'd sit at the dinner table alone, watching the clock tick past hours he was supposed to be home. No texts, no calls, just me and Max, waiting in an apartment that felt emptier by the day. And when he finally walked through the door, he'd act like it was no big deal, brushing off my concern with a quick, "Oh, didn't I text you?" Must have slipped my mind. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust him. But that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. It was like a shadow hanging over me, whispering that something wasn't right. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, that shadow grew darker with every late night and every unanswered question. I didn't want to be that wife, the one who snoops, who doesn't trust her husband. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers, something I didn't even fully understand yet. And as much as I wanted to believe in the man I married, I couldn't ignore the quiet voice in the back of my mind asking, what if he's hiding something? I wish I could say I confronted him right then and there. I wish I had the courage to demand answers the moment I felt that first pang of doubt. But instead, I waited. I waited, hoping I was wrong, hoping things would go back to the way they were. But they didn't. And that's when everything started to unravel. The more I tried to ignore the feeling, the stronger it got. It was like this constant pressure in my chest, a voice in the back of my head that wouldn't shut up. I started noticing every little thing, how he texted, how he avoided eye contact, how distracted he seemed when we were together. The man I married, the one I trusted completely, was starting to feel like a stranger. And that scared me more than anything. One evening, after another late night where he walked in with the same old excuse about last-minute work, I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed to know what was really going on. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started asking around. At first, it was just casual. I'd bring up his late nights and conversations with friends, hoping someone would say something that made sense. I wasn't looking to catch him in a lie, I just wanted to believe I was overthinking it. But what I heard only made things worse. A friend of ours, who works at the same company, mentioned seeing him a few times after hours, not at the office, like he told me, but at a coffee shop nearby. And he wasn't alone. It was always the same woman. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just work. But the way my friend described it, the laughing, how close they seemed, it didn't feel like just work. Hearing that felt like someone punched me in the stomach. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with all these terrible thoughts. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That weekend, he said he needed to go into the office again. I could barely keep a straight face when he told me, but I nodded like everything was normal. As soon as he left, I grabbed my keys and followed him. I felt sick to my stomach the whole time, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd find him at work and feel stupid for doubting him. But he didn't go to work. He drove across town to this little cafe I didn't even know he liked. And there she was. I recognized her from photos he'd shown me before, a coworker he mentioned in passing, but never talked much about. She was pretty, with this easy smile that seemed to light up the room. And the way he looked at her. I hadn't seen him look at me like that in a long time. I stayed in my car, just watching them. They weren't holding hands or doing anything obvious, but you could feel it, the connection. The way they leaned toward each other, laughing like they were the only people in the world. My heart felt like it was shattering right there in my chest. I don't even remember how long I sat there before I finally drove home. I felt numb, like I was floating outside my own body. But one thing was clear, I couldn't ignore this anymore. I had to confront him. When he came home that night, I was ready. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode, but I kept my voice calm. "Hey," I said, acting like everything was normal. "How was work?" "Busy," he replied, dropping his keys on the counter like nothing was wrong. "Lots of meetings." That was it. That was the moment I realized how easily he could lie to me. He looked me right in the eye and said it like it was the truth. I took a deep breath. "Did you get a lot done at the office?" He glanced at me, and for a second, I thought I saw something guilt, maybe? But then he smiled, like nothing was wrong. "Yeah, tons." "Why?" That's when I laid it all out. I told him what I knew, what I saw. I expected him to explain, to at least try to make up some excuse. But instead, he got defensive. "Are you serious right now?" he snapped. "You followed me? What was I supposed to do?" I shot back. "You've been lying to me for weeks." I needed to know the truth. He shook his head, laughing like I was the crazy one. "You're being paranoid. We were just talking about work. You need to trust me." Trust him? After everything I saw, everything I felt in my gut? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He made me feel like I was the problem, like I was losing my mind for even questioning him. But deep down, I knew the truth. And no matter how much he denied it, I couldn't unsee what I saw. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about trust. It was about betrayal. And I wasn't sure if we could come back from that. After that night, everything changed. It was like a switch flipped between us. The man who used to be my best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, suddenly felt like a stranger standing in my living room. We went from sharing everything to barely speaking, each word we exchanged thick with tension and unspoken anger. But the worst part wasn't the silence, it was the gaslighting. Every time I brought up what I saw, he twisted it back on me. You're overreacting. You're imagining things. You're insecure. He made me question my own sanity, like I was the one destroying our marriage just by asking for the truth. I'd catch him texting late at night, and when I asked who it was, he'd roll his eyes and say it was about work. Always work. But I wasn't stupid. I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt in my gut. The problem was, he wouldn't admit it, and that drove me crazy. It's one thing to catch someone cheating, it's another thing entirely when they look you in the eye and tell you it's all in your head. I started to doubt myself. I'd lie awake at night replaying everything in my head, wondering if maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But no matter how many times I tried to convince myself of that, the truth kept creeping back in. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something he couldn't explain away. So, I did the one thing I never thought I'd do. I checked his phone. It was late one night. He was asleep, his phone charging on the nightstand next to him. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I knew it was wrong. I knew it crossed a line. But at that point, I didn't care. I had to know. I opened his messages, and there it was. Her name. Right at the top. Their conversations were exactly what I feared, and worse. It wasn't just about work. It wasn't just harmless chatting. It was personal. Flirty. Intimate. They joked about inside things I didn't understand, shared stories they never told me, and even made plans to meet up again. And the worst part? He talked to her the way he used to talk to me. Like she was the center of his world. Reading those messages felt like a knife to the heart. But at least now I had the truth. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. He was lying to me, and he'd been doing it for months. I didn't confront him right away. I wanted to, but something held me back. Maybe it was shock. Maybe I just needed time to process everything. But the next morning, when he acted like nothing was wrong, like we were just a normal couple going about our day, I snapped. I know, I said quietly over breakfast. He looked up from his coffee, frowning. No what? I met his eyes, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I saw the messages. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Just stared at me, his face unreadable. Then he set his mug down and leaned back in his chair. So, you went through my phone? He said, his voice cold. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. That's what you're focusing on? That I went through your phone? Not the fact that you've been lying to me for months? He shrugged, like it didn't matter. It was just talking. Don't insult me, I snapped, my calm slipping. It wasn't just talking. You were emotionally cheating on me. Hell, maybe more. I don't even know anymore. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. He just sat there, staring at me like he didn't recognize me either. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't care about his excuses. I didn't care about his lies. The man I married was gone, and there was nothing left to fight for. I stood up, my hands shaking but my heart strangely steady. I'm done, I said simply. His eyes widened slightly, like he didn't expect me to actually walk away. Maybe he thought I'd forgive him, that we'd sweep it under the rug like nothing happened. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I packed my bags that day. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, leaving behind the life we built together, the memories we shared. But staying would have been even harder. Because every time I looked at him, I'd see the betrayal. The lies. The man who chose someone else over me. I moved in with a friend for a while, trying to piece my life back together. It wasn't easy. Some days, the anger was overwhelming. Other days, it was the sadness that hit me like a wave. But through it all, I reminded myself of one thing. I deserved better. He tried reaching out a few times after I left. Texts, calls, even showing up at my door once. But I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I gave him my trust, my love, my everything, and he threw it all away. Now, months later, I'm still healing. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why he did what he did, but I've accepted that it's not my burden to carry anymore. His choices are on him. And as painful as it was, walking away was the best decision I've ever made. Because at the end of the day, I realized something important. I deserve to be with someone who chooses me. Every day. Without hesitation. Without lies. And until I find that, I'm okay being on my own. I shared this here because I know I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. If you're reading this and feeling that same gut-wrenching doubt I felt, trust your instincts. You're not crazy. You're not paranoid. And you deserve the truth. Thanks for listening, Reddit.